when you push against the system will push back. Whatever you do, both in benign ways and in horrifying ways, you will get pushback beyond the level of your personal circle of people that you know. You know, in the United States, which that kind of pressure is mostly informal, though not entirely. If you walk far enough from the mainstream, you will be hospitalized, incarcerated, or killed. Anywhere.
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. For this episode, help me welcome master mediator, facilitator, and trainer of nonviolent communication, author and activist Miki Kashtan. All right, well, we are opening up another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, and I am very, very excited to have Miki Kashtan here. And this is really my first opportunity to meet Miki face-to-face on screen. Miki, I just was mentioning to you that I was so moved by your recent conversation on another podcast called Emerge with Daniel Thorson. And also I've, full disclosure, just signed up for your year-long program in 2019 of about leadership, and just this first immersion today was quite extraordinary. So I'm really excited to speak with you, and I'd like to, for those who don't know about you, I'd like to just mention a little bit about how to find out more information about you, and then we can revisit this at the end as well. That you have a website, fearlessheart.org, and
thefearlessheart.org. If you go to fearlessheart.org without the in the beginning, you'll go somewhere else.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And you're the creator of Convergent Facilitation, which we might hear about in this interview. We'll see. And you're a co-founder of the Bay Area Nonviolent Communication Group, and consultant to many organizations and agencies, as far as I could tell from that interview that I listened to, and a number of books: Spinning Threads of Radical Aliveness, Reweaving Our Human Fabric, Working Together to Create a Nonviolent Future, and a favorite of mine that I just picked up a little while back, The Little Book of Courageous Living. Sweet little book, so much heart in it. I am very fond of it. So Miki, thank you so much for taking time. I know that you are a very busy person, and I've really just felt so somehow like I've got a pulse on particular aspects of what I would call the leading edge of activism and engaged action in the world. Just by every time I touch in with your work or what you're saying or an interview, I feel like I've got another shot of really vital juice, of inspiration, of clarity. You really bring a remarkable blend of
Thank you.
Of kind of a passion and a groundedness. And if I may, the piece that was just nailed down for me today in this first episode of your class that I was present to is your transparency, which I would put very high on the list of my criteria for leadership in these times. So with all of that said, Miki, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here, because I want to say that it's not random what I say yes to or no to. that the thing that got my attention is that the people who are listening to this podcast are likely to be people who have made the choice to look squarely in the face at the very likely possibility of collapse, which in fact is already unfolding in many parts of the world. And so this very much is the kind of audience I want to speak to because of two reasons. One is it's easier for me. I don't have so many barriers to cross to be on the same page with a person when they have already come because they are willing, open to look at something that is so enormously difficult to comprehend. And second, um, a lot of people who, wake up to the reality of what we're facing. And collapse is really just one manifestation of it. The horrors have been going on for many thousands of years already. Um, and I know it happened to me when I first encountered it, 30 something years ago. There is a crushing sense of helplessness. It's like, okay, so this is happening, and what on earth can I do? Which often sends people right back into numbness and, well, I guess I can do nothing, so I may as well ... So I want to support people who seek to know what they can do. And so that's one part of why I said yes to this one.
Well, thank you for that. One thing I've noticed in every one of these interviews or at times when I've heard you speak, you have what seems to be a basket full of distinctions or notions of the human dynamic, the inner human dynamic at both the individual and the collective level. And I can't imagine a more important basket full of distinctions to have is something to make sense of how are we reacting when we're brave enough to face something as excruciating as considering the unraveling of our reality. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious if that sparks you to say anything.
Yes, I really treasure distinctions. I'm also very aware how near to either or thinking distinctions are. It's like it's a sharp tool and it's a dangerous tool because we can easily fall right back into patriarchal either or thinking, which is part of what got us here in the first place. So it's both a question of how we use distinctions for what purpose, and also that many times things that appear to us like either or are really on a spectrum that we can move towards rather than chastising ourselves or other people if they appear to be more towards this side than that side of the spectrum. And this I have noted for years now that wherever we are on any spectrum, we tend to judge people who are on this side of us or that side of us on that same spectrum. So just to give one example, each one of us has a certain amount of recycling that we do. Never mind the systemic question of does recycling help or not. I'm not looking at that. I have decided X amount of recycling that I do. If somebody recycles more than me, I will call them fanatic. If somebody recycles less than me, I will call them someone who doesn't care about the earth. And that particular mechanism is one of the things that we do. So while I want to have the distinctions, I also want to remember that I am within a total continuum with all other living beings, including all humans, in terms of capacity and commitment to different things. So that's what came to me to say, that yes, it helps me organize my thinking, and it has this potential danger if it's binary either or, and one side becomes better than the other. Then we're right back in the center of patriarchy.
Yeah, thank you for that. And when I'm talking about that basket full of distinctions, I don't even know if it really is a distinction that I'm recalling. It's you've laid out a number of different examples that from your experience and observation of what it takes to change and what sort of dynamics can start to occur for people, especially when it's pretty large scale, when it gets closer and closer to an existential level concern, which it seems like so many of the issues in our world are. I'm curious if anything comes to mind in terms of what you tend to see these days that might be different than reactions to change that you might have seen 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Is there any difference that you're seeing?
I like the question. I have a sense that two things have happened in that period, and I want to start from a quote from a dear friend of mine that you might also want to interview one day. His name is Tom Atlee from the Cointelligence Institute. And the quote is, "The world keeps getting better and better and worse, faster and faster all the time." And so I think that both the better and better and the worse and worse are responsible for a certain change. You were speaking about the worse and worse, the writing on the wall, the ink of the writing is getting better contrast, deeper hue, more intensity. It's harder not to see the writing on the wall. And so the writing on the wall is motivating people to begin to question things. The other thing that has happened that is equally, if not more significant, is a growth in the direction of alternatives becoming clear and known. So a lot of tools are now available that were not as available 20 years ago. So if I look, for example, at the tradition from within which I come, which is nonviolent communication, it has gone through a pretty significant explosion in terms of numbers of people who are familiar with that approach. One of the things that I see culturally is that in more places you see people talking about needs as a category to consider in our choices, in our actions, etc. So instead of like an abstract thing of we want justice, which people are still saying, but there are places where that gets specified more clearly. We want to attend to more needs. We want the impacts on other people's needs to be seen. You know, things like this are being said in the public sphere more regularly than I remember them from 20 years ago. So that's another thing that happens. So people have both more motivation because things are difficult, and more willingness because they see a possibility. So overall, I think that we change when we see that something is not working, and when we have clarity of vision about what else is possible, and resources to mobilize to make the change. So on an individual scale, there's much more clarity and much more capacity for people to embrace new practices and new ways of being. Also, knowledge disseminates faster now than it was. But I am seeing, and I don't know if it's because people are self-selecting differently these days than they were a while back, or I am getting clearer in what I'm offering, or there's a morphogenic field that has changed. I don't know. But I am coming in contact more and more with people who are ready to take action rather than people who are seeking healing. That's one of the things that I see over the course of the last 15 years, that more people come to whatever learning events I am scheduling, or calls, or whatever, who are very ready. They are willing to be uncomfortable. They are willing to take action before knowing. They are willing to take action even while they're suffering. These kinds of things are somewhat different. And I'm wondering if this is the kind of response that you were looking for.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for any particular type of response, and it's perfect what you're saying. It's I see less of what you're describing than you are talking about. I'm inspired. I love that you're saying that you're seeing more of each of these attributes. Yay. it's
And
beautiful.
my sample is very small. I just
Yeah,
want to be clear. My sample is people who are in contact with me.
yeah, I got it. I got it. So what I was hearing in the kind of in between your words was that people that in this small sample, you're experiencing more willingness to take action. And I think I heard you say a willingness to be uncomfortable in the face of this unknown, and this rather confronting unknown, and more interested in taking action than in seeking healing. And that's certainly been um, my experience being in the training business and the coaching business for a long time. The vast majority of folks have been for a long time, and in my experience still are, primarily interested in their own healing and kind of a self-focus. And that's why it's refreshing, even no matter how small your sample is, it's refreshing to hear of pockets of people who are really stepping up into that, again, that willingness to be uncomfortable, that willingness to step into the mystery, and that willingness to start to engage with
Yeah.
something larger than ourselves.
So,
So inspiring.
for example, you were now with me for 2 hours on that leadership call.
Yeah.
Didn't you have a sense that the people who were on that call had a kind of mobilization and willingness, those who spoke?
Well, then, as you mentioned, though, they're self-selected to be with you for leadership in these times. So yes, and absolutely, they were. They're every person I had the privilege of speaking with briefly in the small groups was inspiring and clear and very straight, very direct, and like yourself, just really transparent. It was,
Mm-hmm. Okay,
it was
so
great.
okay, so here's the deal then.
Okay.
If your thing is working with people as a coach and you're not seeing different people, then maybe it is about what you said, that maybe your invitation isn't accurate enough to what you're seeking to who you're seeking to work with. So that's why I was saying right from the beginning, I don't know if I'm getting better at inviting people well, or the change has happened in people. I honestly have no way of knowing. I do have a sense that in order to invite people more accurately, you would need to be willing to lose, because um, because when you invite people in the way that you do now, and I don't know quite what it is, there are X number of people that come to you, and X number of people put food on the table, keep a roof over your head, maybe give you some to set aside for a rainy day, etc. Is there any fear that if your message of who you want to invite to receive coaching from you, that if that message gets more laser-like and specific, that you might have fewer clients?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I understand the track you're asking it on, and I feel pretty comfortable responding by saying, for the past 5 years, which is really roughly 5 years ago, I had my woke moment into this whole thing about accelerated or abrupt anthropogenic climate change and so on, basically collapse of Earth and human systems. And I realized it was time for me to just offer my gifts to the world. This is really not about money making. It's really not even about survival. I've got just enough survival level income and so on that I don't have to have this cover really anything. And I feel also a rawness. It's actually a refreshing rawness as I'm reinventing myself in this next iteration of this body of work. I've had the pleasure of being on the periphery of a man named Jem Bendell. You've probably heard his name a bunch. He's recently created a Deep Adaptation forum on the internet, and I'm a volunteer moderator for one of the subgroups in that. And just being connected with that kind of fresh wave, and myself being relatively disengaged from even from outcome of any kind in my work with folks, it's been a remarkable breakthrough just in the past couple of months in terms of sheer numbers. I haven't seen numbers like the people who are showing interest and signing up for my work and so on. I haven't seen numbers like that in years. And in terms of the quality of conversation and engagement, it is night and day. So some element of what you're saying in the center of it, I think, is so. And I don't think it has anything to do with the money thing, but I think at the center of what you're saying, yes.
I don't think it by necessity implies losing money. I think it by necessity implies the willingness to lose money. And that's key. I want to willingly take on the potential consequences of my actions, even if if those consequences don't happen.
Yep.
And the place where there's hesitancy about accepting the consequences, those are the places where we're still tied to the patriarchal capitalist, endeavor, and are afraid in some ways to exit that particular type of discourse. So there is an initial piece, and it's iterative, because I am regularly finding new layers of places where I thought that I was done exiting mainstream culture, and I'm not. There's this little hook and that little hook that I'm still hanging myself on. And yes, when I discover them, my feedback loop now is really tight. I discover something, and it's almost instantaneous that my organism is starting to figure out a way to exit. And still there's more. That means the stuff is deeply internalized. So that is the first layer of the obstacle to change, is the places where I'm still buying into the existing system. This is also part of why so many social movements end up functioning in ways that are remarkably similar to the bodies and entities that they're trying to transform. Yeah, and then the second layer is that people around you will push back, because to the extent that people around you are still embedded in the normative patriarchal white supremacist capitalist culture, etc., when you step out of it, it increases their discomfort. Their internal compromise becomes more visible when you move away from the compromise. And often enough, that will then take the form of you will be blamed, you will become the problem, you will be pushed away, you will lose relationships. So the risks are real. They're not just on paper. And then there is the third layer, which is the larger consequences, because systems, all systems, resist change. When you push against the system will push back. Whatever you do, both in benign ways and in horrifying ways, you will get pushback beyond the level of your personal circle of people that you know. In the United States, that kind of pressure is mostly informal, though not entirely. If you walk far enough from the mainstream, you will be hospitalized, incarcerated, or killed anywhere. There are people who suddenly die in very confusing circumstances. And just as a little tidbit, apparently people who practice alternative medicine die like this at higher rates than other people. What does that mean? Is it possible that there's pushback from the medical establishment? I wouldn't rule it out. It's not going to be publicized and made known, hey, we are killing people who practice alternative medicine, or whatever the case might be. But there has not been a single empire that has demilitarized itself and peacefully transitioned to something else. That has never happened. There's no reason to believe that the current set of empires will behave any differently. So if we become effective enough, we become a threat. That is something that I want us all to know.
Well, I absolutely appreciate you bringing that up. And if I could just loop back to how you started that particular track, you were talking about, I think, the more or less the individual experience of being fully embedded and more or less unaware and so on, then resisting uh, it's likely I would encounter resistance if I'm trying to presence myself as someone who is disengaging consciously, that the more or less individual or close personal circle pushback, and then eventually the systemic pushback that you were just talking about. Um, I know that you've been instrumental in, for sure, the nonviolent communication community in the Bay Area, and undoubtedly many other agencies and groups. I'm wondering if you could share, how do you speak to a group that wants to flourish, wants to make it through the various layers, membranes of resistance that are normal at this point for any kind of conscious organization to move forward? How do you take them through that conversation you were just talking about? How do you ready them for it? How do you build capacity to be present in the face of that?
So this brings me to something that we haven't talked about yet, which is the process of creating alternative systems.
Mm-hmm.
There are many people who somehow believe that system is bad. Not that we have systems that don't work. They believe any system doesn't work. For me, that belief is dangerous because if you don't create alternative systems that are aligned with the vision and values and purpose and things that you want to create in the world, then you will end up having systems that are implicit and replicate what is out there. So I will give an example. Let's say in terms of resource flow systems. What happens to resources? Where do they come from? How do they get distributed? Who gets what? All of these kinds of things. You know, this kind of stuff in conventional organizations, that piece, part of the piece that I'm talking about is called budgets and compensation. These are obscure words that mask the reality that resources come in and somebody decides how they're going to be distributed. If you don't look at those relationships closely and decide how you're going to make them happen in a way that is going to be more aligned with flow and connection and togetherness and needs and all of these things, you will recreate the idea that resources flow to people based on what they deserve. And this happens without anybody even noticing. So I will come someplace and people will say, well, I want to give you the, they give me the better room in a retreat center, for example. Why? Because I am the person coming to teach, but maybe I don't have any need. Maybe somebody else is there, with a certain disability, and they would benefit from that room more than I would. If you don't have clear systems that operationalize the principles that you adopt, then you won't act on the basis of those principles. So that is a big thing of what I work with people or groups on, is how to set up systems that really are aligned with the kind of vision, the kind of purpose or values that we want to bring into our work.
I'm wondering if you could take that thread just a little bit further, but include inclusion, include issues of equity, issues of diversity, and assuming that this organization you and I are talking about that wants to grow itself in a good way, how might you encourage that inclusion that they're wanting? How have you coached organizations to find that track for themselves?
It's it's an incredibly tricky arena, and part of what makes it tricky is that we don't have a whole lot of approaches to power and privilege out there that are based on needs and on love. So more often than not, the response to issues of power and privilege is one more instance of patriarchal shaming, blaming. This is the right thing, this is the wrong thing. That happens a lot. And that doesn't actually address the problem. It just splinters it, creates more division, and it's very problematic. And so creating those new methodologies, while at the same time people are aching and suffering for real reasons. This is really an area where we are changing the engine while flying the plane, and where we don't have the luxury of landing the plane somewhere, fixing the engine, and then taking off again. We are given the task of doing it while flying. And so it's kind of like the only way that I can think of in this moment, and tomorrow I might think a different way, is a lot of bootstrapping. For example, I was talking this morning with a group of people in Extinction Rebellion, which is a movement that has sprung up in the last year, specifically in response to questions of imminent climate collapse. And they were talking about two groups that are in conflict with each other, where one group says to the other, you're not attentive enough to power and privilege. And that second group is saying to the first, you're not practicing nonviolent communication enough. So there you are, you have an amazing, intense conflict. And one of the things that I suggested to them is, you can try to come up with agreements about how you talk about things and how you bring up issues of power and privilege, how you respond to issues of power and privilege when they're brought up. You can talk about this forever. The reality is that this is a place where almost everyone is traumatized. And so whenever a topic comes up, we are responding from within a fight, flight, freeze paradigm. Within that, adopting new behavior is very difficult. So one of the things that I propose to them is to create a team of people, establish a team of people that are available to support people who get caught in such moments of difficulty, regardless of where they are. So if you are, let's say, a person of color, a trans person, a woman, a lower class person, wherever you are in the power map of the world, if you are on the receiving end of treatment by others that seems to you like it comes from lack of awareness because of privilege. You try to talk about it, it just makes it worse. You have an address to go to. You can receive empathy, you can receive coaching, you can receive systemic support, you can receive all kinds of things. Similarly, let's say you are white, heterosexual male, and you middle class, upper class, whatever it is, and people are telling you that your behavior is having terrible impact on them, and you say, I didn't mean that. That's not, no, why do you say it like this? Don't blame or shame me, whatever. That is not going to go over very well. It's going to, escalate and create a snowball. You too can go to that team and get support. Support that will help you, first of all, receive the experience of being seen for your humanity, for your intentions, for your fundamental innocence. That is why you get triggered and defensive in the first place. Then you might receive coaching, then you might receive support in other ways. So if anyone caught in any of those dynamics has a place to go to, it means that only the people who staff that team need to be highly trained, highly skilled, and highly capable of working under conditions of stress. That makes it a systemic response that everybody from anywhere can go there, and you don't need to disseminate, new knowledge, new skills, new consciousness to possibly thousands of people at once. So these are the kinds of things, is creating agreements and responses and ways of functioning that reduce the pressure on each of us to be a saint in order for things to work well.
Miki, I'm clear that we could go on for hours, and I'm very aware that I'm creeping up on the end of my time with you. I'm wondering if we could just slightly adjust the level. You were just talking on more of an agency level or an organization level, a systemic level, and frankly, a lot of the folks that I interact with in this body of work and in my life, they are aware of the need to connect with other people in this time, whatever their focus is, whatever the things that matter most to them. They seem to really get the idea, or have the idea for quite a while now, that it's really time to get with other people and have support. And it won't be as nearly as organized or as large scale as what you're just describing on the organizational level.
Yes.
On the level of just a neighborhood and a family and a few friends that are walking distance from each other and so on. Do you have anything to say to people who have that desire to come together with other people, but are also experiencing some of the reluctance that you were also describing even earlier about sort of the built-in knee-jerk reaction that holds me back from sharing, holds me back from taking the risk of broaching an uncomfortable conversation with a friend or a coworker and saying, what do you think? Would you be interested in having tea on Fridays? And maybe we could talk about this from time to time. Do you have anything to share at that kind of more individual or neighborhood level?
I think, so you're asking a very early question, which is, once I personally woke up, how do I get over the hump or even beginning to talk with other people about it? My sense is that for that to happen, we need to have places that are already ready-made for people to go to and get support and get some sense of companionship, some sense of, no, you're not crazy, that they can lean on and from which they can begin to have those conversations. And it's quite possible that such places don't exist sufficiently. In other words, for example, your podcast apparently is one such place, but it's non-interactive. Maybe there are other parts of your website or whatever that are interactive. I haven't looked, but it isn't a place where people can come and ask their own questions and receive answers, not the podcast. So it would be amazing if you or people that are listening to this would create, I don't know, Facebook groups, meetup groups, whatever, for people who are just beginning to engage with this, to have the support and wisdom and backing of people who have been on the journey a little while longer.
Great.
The next step is what is of great interest to me, which is how do we actually recreate community? Because that is one of the things that capitalism, and especially late stage capitalism, has done very successfully, is to sever communities and to put all of us in an impossible situation. Not all of us. Those of us, the more class privileged we have, the more true what I'm about to say is, which is in community with people that is based only on relationships, and in relationships with people that care for our material conditions where we don't have a real human relationship with them. And remarrying those two. In other words, if I live in a particular block, doing something like taking an inventory within the neighborhood of what resources people have that they are willing to share, and having that available to all the people in the neighborhood starts moving it from randomly being here to having a shared fate, which we actually do. If there's going to be an earthquake, if there's going to be a flood, the people in the neighborhood are the first ones that are going to be impacted with us. You know, I may be a lot closer to my cousin who lives, you know, even 100 miles away than to my neighbor who lives across the street. But it's my neighbor and I that will have the same conditions. So weaving some community in that way will mean something. And most recently, I have been really playing and engaging with the question of how to create communities of shared risk, so that we really pull our fates together. Because right now, you know, you do a block party, you have one day a year where all the people on the block come together, share food, and have a great time, and then retreat into the isolation and privacy of their life. But it would be entirely different if one day a week you all shared food from your gardens, from your shopping, from whatever, and you knew that that day is actually shared. It would be an entirely different thing, even one step further, where, I don't know, let's say there are 6 families that choose to do this, where each day of the week, one family feeds the other 5. Suddenly, life changes. Within that context, you can begin to have conversations that you couldn't have before. But having the conversations without the material base of we are in this together is abstract. Doesn't carry enough weight and meaning. That's just my personal sense of it. I don't know if this will resonate for people or even for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And what came to mind in the first example that you had is we have a program here in Southern Oregon. It's called CERT, and it's Community Emergency Response Team. And a small area, usually at a firehouse in their neighborhood, they'll have the opportunity for people to come and be trained at a very basic level to really connect and connect up resources,
Mhm.
find out who's elderly and needs extra assistance if electricity were to go out, and on and on and on. And so at the more officious or agency kind of level, that's a great way to bring together folks for the first time.
Yeah.
Nicely structured, very informational, and a great skill set for people to grow. I'm hearing you take it to the next level in terms of a more personable, a more connection-based and relationship-based way to connect. And I'm certain that you've mentioned from time to time that which I know is at the center of your work, nonviolent communication. And for people who are not aware of that, I'll put some sort of a number of different links for massive offload of information if they're wanting it. I'm wondering if you have anything you could share about something that I was hearing in this one class that I've done with you today. You were mentioning that many people are inclined to, once they start to get in some momentum with learning and experiencing and integrating nonviolent communication in their being, that the next step for many people is to then want to share it with others. That that's the way to grow it into the next level and the next. Is that a good recap of what I was hearing? And could you say something about having that skill set as a part of community building? Would you find that useful?
I I am looking for I'm looking for ways of applying my NVC skills without having to teach other people how to use them, so that it's almost like I lend my ears and mouth to people instead of requiring them to take some training. And I have found that when I come someplace and I use my skills, often there's immediate transformation that happens. But if I wait for people to learn those skills before there's transformation, that usually takes 2 to 5 years before people have real integration of the skills when they learn them. This is why you mentioned earlier convergent facilitation, and maybe this can be what we end on. So convergent facilitation is a tool that I developed for supporting groups in making collaborative decisions that work for everyone on the basis of what's important to everyone. If you have a facilitator that is familiar with this method, the people in the group don't have to know anything. They just come with their opinions, with their intensity, with everything, and the facilitator has a process that brings it all together. This to me is a much more efficient way to bring a certain set of perspectives, principles, practices into a larger scale than teaching individuals how to do it.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. Now you've got me really interested in following that thread eventually on the convergent facilitation. It really is the end of the window of time that we arranged to be together. And I so, again, appreciate your patience with my having forgotten to send you questions out ahead. And truthfully, I didn't hold it as something essential because it always seemed like you did what you said you were going to do, which is really respond in the moment with what was truthfully there. So for that and for your work and your obvious passion,
Thank you.
your leadership. I so thank you. And Miki, I'm just wondering if you had just one last 1-minute segment to leave folks with a message from your heart to theirs. Would you have anything to offer?
I don't think there's anything very much that I haven't said. I just want to say that on the fearlessheart.org, there's written materials, there are audio and video, and there are opportunities to engage with me and with other people on calls that are entirely free of charge, and on a variety of topics. And in a few weeks, I'm going to begin also to offer a monthly call on the topic of reckoning with collapse. So there will be opportunities for people to come there and ask questions and get some guidance too.
Fantastic. I look forward to that. Miki Kashtan, one more time, thank you so much. I hope against hope that this is not our last time having a conversation like this. Thank you so much for your gifts and your generous spirit in the world. And I look forward to my next class with you next week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.